You are watching the Poor Boys Horology Podcast, the podcast for watch enthusiasts on a budget. Your host for today's podcast is Dr. Ed DeVries, an amateur horologist whose personal collection includes Timex, Rolex, and everything in between. If you are interested in dive watches, dress watches, designer watches, military watches, automatic watches, hand-winding watches, quartz watches, or pocket watches, the Poor Boys Horology Podcast is about to become your favorite podcast. So click like and subscribe. Then sit back, relax, and enjoy today's episode of the Poor Boys Horology Podcast.
I had actually set my MacBook up on my desk here to move a video that I had shot earlier today at my other office over to my MacBook here at the house. And I just, for whatever reason, decided that, you know what, I really like this camera angle. And so I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to use it for this month's Poor Boys Horology Podcast. Before we get started, let me do a quick wristwatch check here. I've got on my Orient Defender. If you watched last month's podcast, if you remember, I was talking about the watches that I would want to go into the apocalypse with. And I said that one of them may very well be the Orient Defender. I had shot that video just over a month ago, and I unboxed this watch in that video. And of course, I wound it for the first time, put it on my wrist, and I have been wearing it continuously every day since. And anyways, I'm looking at my watch right now, and my watch says that it is 2:28 p.m. I'm looking up here, 2:28 p.m. on the corner of my iMac, which is what I was using to set this watch to, 2:28 here on my MacBook Pro as well. I had set this to I'd set this on my MacBook, which shows 2:28. This watch here shows 2:28. What does that mean? It means that I have been wearing this watch for over a month, and it's keeping as near perfect time as a mechanical watch can keep. You know, it's running obviously less than a second a day, fast or slow. I'm sure it's not keeping perfect time, but it's within a second one way or the other every day, or else it wouldn't still say 2:28, 2:28, 2:28 over a month later. I believe of all the mechanical watches that I owned and that I've ever owned, that this one is the closest to perfect time that I've ever had. If I just happened to catch one that was just, happened to be calibrated near perfect right out of the box, I don't know. Maybe I got lucky. But this is a great timekeeper. And I've really enjoyed wearing this watch, and it's a very stylish watch. It's a Japanese military watch, the Orient Defender. Comes on a nice leather strap. I said that I might replace it with a NATO. I looked in my little box there that I keep my watch straps in things. I thought I had a 22 millimeter NATO strap. I did not, so I didn't order one. I just kept it on the leather strap. But it's been a great watch to wear. And so follow up to last month's video. If you're considering the Orient Defender, I would say that it is an excellent selection for you. Another watch that I want to bring to your attention is one from my collection that I've shown you before, and that is this here. It is the Invicta. It's an Invicta dive watch, and it's kind of a subby homage watch, but not really. It is the brass watch, or the bronze watch rather. And as you can see here, I'm going to kind of turn the angles here for you, kind of let you see some of that patina on that, as I have wore this in the ocean, and I have wore this in the pool, and I have showered in it. And of course, the more you wear a bronze watch in the water, the more the color will change. And I love this watch. In fact, my brother-in-law's birthday here was just a couple of weeks ago, and he has liked mine so much. I got this over a year ago now as an anniversary present from my wife, but he liked it so much that for his birthday here a couple of weeks ago, I bought him one just like it, and he's loving his as well. But one thing I like about this particular Invicta is you notice that the Invicta is not etched there in the side. That you do have the Invicta brand there, but you don't have the second hand is not the Invicta logo, and you don't have the Invicta logo all over this thing like you would. Most Invictas are over branded. This one is not. This one is tastefully branded. It does also have the signed clasp there. And this is not the original band. I put a rubber band on here. It came with a blue leather band, and I put on a blue rubber band so that I would feel more comfortable swimming in it and wearing it in the shower. But it's just a beautiful watch, and I like the way the blue and the face and the band here just pops with that bronze of the case and everything. And so I just wanted to bring that out of the collection and bring that back to your attention to say that I really love this watch, and it really would be a good one to add to your collection. And the one thing that both this watch and this watch have in common is that they are both military style watches. And we think of this as a Submariner homage, and it is. Most people don't even realize today that the Rolex Submariner, the iconic classic dive watch, sports watch, dress watch, whatever you consider it to be, is actually a military watch. It was designed for the British Royal Navy. And of course, those Vostok watches that I love so much, they were designed for the Soviet military. And so our watches, our wristwatches are actually, if it weren't for military watches, we wouldn't have wristwatches today. You know, back during the 15th century when they first started developing watches, watches were purely for show. The timekeeping ability of watches back in the 15th century, it was garbage, okay? And so people would wear the watches as pendants. They would wear them as jewelry. They would wear them to show them off. They would wear them to show that they had money, but they didn't really wear them to keep time because they didn't really keep time all that accurately. In the 17th century, men began to wear watches in their pockets, and they somewhat used them to tell time, but it was just a rough idea of time because these watches, you know, they were way off. Your watch could be half an hour off, 45 minutes off. Who knows what it could be. And so, again, you wore them just to show off, if you will. But by the end of the 19th century, timekeeping had been, you know, it was pretty accurate. Watches were pretty accurate. Pocket watches especially, you know, were pretty accurate. There were some wrist watches, but usually they were just pocket watches that were strapped on somebody's wrist. They weren't wrist watches in the way that we think of them today. In fact, by the end of the 19th century, the Spanish-American War in 1898, for example, is when soldiers really began to start strapping those pocket watches around their wrists. In World War I, in particular, what we now know as the wristwatch came of age. And again, it was out of military necessity because the soldiers, you know, they couldn't drop their machine gun to just go reach it, or their rifle just to go reach into their pocket and pull out a pocket watch. Life was not going to work that way for them. So they started strapping their pocket watches to their wrist, but even still they had to flip the lid. So sometimes they started ripping the lid off, leaving the watch face exposed. And then they started kind of welding lugs onto the pocket watches so that they could put something similar to what we know as the NATO strap now through that, and they could strap it to their wrist, and they could be watching their time there as they were doing different things.
Open your web browser and type in www.barnesreview.org and discover the Barnes Review magazine. In the Barnes Review, you will read vignettes of man, from the prehistoric to the very recent, from forgotten races and civilizations to first-person accounts of World War II and the late Cold War. There is no more interesting magazine published today, nor a more significant and important subject than real history. So visit www.barnesreview.org and subscribe to the Barnes Review. You can subscribe to receive the Barnes Review magazine in its print form, or in convenient electronic delivery. Our host has been a subscriber to both formats for years. So visit www.barnesreview.org and subscribe to the Barnes Review.
And so the leading maker of military watches during World War I was probably Bulova. And so it had a chrome-plated brass case, and it had a unique feature, and that was that they had designed a movement that the second hand would stop when you pulled the crown out. In other words, what we now know as the hacking movement or the hacking mechanism was developed by Bulova during World War I. You remember, you watched the old war movies, synchronize your watches. That was to enable them to do that. And so the Bulova A11 was issued at first to the pilots. Of course, there weren't that many pilots in World War I, but then it began to be issued to the infantry groups, the soldiers on the ground as well. Of course, the Swiss began making excellent timepieces and, wristwatches for these military uses, and militaries around the world started looking to the Swiss watchmakers, rather the Swiss clockmakers, who were now making wristwatches for them. and they were, looking to that. And so shall we say, the wristwatch in World War I came of age, and the age of the wristwatch was born. Of course, during wartime, watches have to be able to withstand a lot. The things that a watch, for example, this watch here, I would wear this watch in the dirt. I would wear this watch in the sand. I would wear this watch in the ocean. I'd go diving in this watch. I'd go swimming in this watch. I would trudge around in the mud in this watch. I do all kinds of things in this watch. I don't have it in front of me here. Well, here, I'll grab this watch here. This watch here is even it's a Seiko solar watch. It's a beautiful watch. I love this watch. But you know what? I would wash my hands with this watch on. I might even take a shower with this watch on, though I probably wouldn't. I would probably take it off to take a shower. I would take it off to take a bath. I would take it off to go swimming. I would take it off to do the dishes. I wouldn't go trudging around in the mud in this watch. I would be taking stuff and doing other, just, what I'm saying here. Now, I don't have one here in front of me, but if I had one of the Chinese watches in my collection, maybe a T-Vise, obviously I wouldn't be, I wouldn't be trudging around in the mud in that. I'd probably take it off to wash my hands. Again, different watches can withstand different things. And so you had a nice pocket watch, say, in the World War I era, and a soldier, wouldn't necessarily want to dive down into a foxhole and crawl around in the mud with that because, he didn't think the watch could withstand that. And so coming to talk about military watches, these watches had to be able to take the crap. You had to be able to dig around in the dirt with them. You had to be able to sludge around in the mud with them. You had to be able to get in the water with them. You had to be able to get them dirty and wet, and they had to be able to withstand sweat. And then you've got a machine gun, there's a lot of, and so forth. And it has to be shock resistant, impact resistant, and so forth. And so they really began to step up watch production during World War I. Really, the wristwatch was designed to be able to withstand so many things that even the pocket watch could not. In fact, military-grade watches today are designed to withstand things that regular watches just aren't designed to withstand. And you say, well, why? Because they have to be. Because the necessity of war demanded it. And so the watch brands that we know today, watch brands like Bulova, watch brands like Hamilton, watch brands like Elgin, even watch brands like Rolex, they really began making watches for the military markets. Vostok, for example, again, the Soviet military there. But a lot of these great watchmakers, even Timex, they were making watches for soldiers, which is why watches like the Timex Camper even are so popular today. They started out as military watches. Marathon, Swiss military, Breitling, Omega, Bell & Ross. Even Mont Blanc began as a military watch. Seiko, which is one of the world's foremost luxury brands of watches, the Japanese watchmaker Seiko, they even began making watches for the Japanese military.
Welcome to the Christendom Curriculum. Every parent who decides to homeschool wants to secure a great education for their child, while also saving time and money. But these days, many parents have another concern. They also want a homeschool curriculum without all the multiculturalist, politically correct diversity doctrine that's really little more than a thin disguise for an anti-Christian, anti-American, and anti-Western civilization bias. Now there is such a curriculum. The Christendom Curriculum gives your children a complete education in Bible, history, literature, and more, focusing on the classic academic skills of reading, writing, and arithmetic. But we also tell the story of Christendom, the story of the Christian nations, especially as Christ's kingdom has been historically manifest in the nations of Europe and America, and we do so without apology. The Christendom Curriculum is the only Christian nationalist homeschool program you'll find. We support the right of the European and American peoples to their historic Christian cultures against the globalist leftists who want to destroy those cultures. Not only that, but we provide assigned reading courses for various hot-button subjects in our current culture wars, including feminism, social justice, and cultural Marxism, among others. These reading courses will teach your kids how to survive a social justice warrior attack, how to debate with leftists on social media, how to reform their local churches and communities, and more. We're living in a time of tremendous historical and social change. Christians have the opportunity now to begin building the culture and civilization of the next 1,000 years and beyond. It's an exciting time to be alive. So if you want to help raise the next generation of culture warriors, if you want your children to grow up with a love for Christ's kingdom and for their own nation, while at the same time learning how to defend America and rebuild the West, the easy-to-use Christendom Curriculum is for you. Click the Learn More button to get in on the action. And thanks for listening.
And so what are the things you should be looking for when shopping for a military watch? First of all, it's durability. In other words, it has to be able to withstand sweating. It has to be able to withstand getting wet. It has to be able to withstand getting dirty and muddy. It has to be able to take a beating and keep on, keeping on. Keep on keeping time. The old saying, time X takes a licking, keeps on ticking. That's exactly what it needs to be able to do. And so the first thing you need to look for in a military watch is durability. The second thing is luminescence. The lume on this watch, it's okay. For a military-grade watch, I was really disappointed in its lume and in the amount of time that lume lasted. But you need luminescence. In fact, a lot of the old U.S. military watches and Soviet military watches, they had a little radioactive symbol on the face. And the reason for that is because they actually used radioactive material for the lume. You say, well, why would they do that? So that it would glow really bright for a really long time. Why do you want it to glow really bright for a really long time? Well, you want to be able to see at night. You want to be able to see underwater and so forth. And so luminescence is something that you want to look for. You also want to look at your power source. A self-winding watch is probably best, though for a number of years, the military watches were hand-winding. Some of the newer survival watches, like the new Casio G-Shock, the one that I talked about there in our last video, the one that I said would be the one I would go into the apocalypse with, it's solar powered. And so then you don't have to worry about batteries or winding at all. But you want to look at your power source and you want to know that it's something that can replenish itself. You don't want to have to worry about a battery dying. And then there's the watch face. You want a watch face. You don't want it to be too huge, which is why the old military shandies, as they called them, which is why they had a smaller face. But and some of the watches now, maybe some would argue, are getting in too big of a face. I would say 40 millimeters is probably about the right size for a military watch. But the reason that you want a face that you can see easily. You don't want to have to strain to look at your watch. You want something that you can see easily. You want clearly marked indices, numbers and so forth. And also, visibility is key. And then there's the size and weight. You don't want too light of a watch. You don't want too heavy of a watch. But, you want something that will be durable. Again, you want durability. So those are some of the features that you would look for in a military watch. As for what is the best military watch that was ever made, some people would probably argue the Rolex Submariner. I would argue it's the Vostok Amphibia. That watch is just indestructible. It's very accurate. You can run for 20, 30, 40 years. I have Vostok Amphibias that are older than I am. They were made in the Soviet era. They've never seen the watchmaker's shop since the day they left the factory, and yet they keep good time and they're workhorses. But what do you think is the best military watch of all time? What I want to do is I want to leave this podcast today. I want to leave it open up, and I want for our viewers, our listeners, to send me an email, and I want you to tell me what do you think is the best military watch that was ever made, and tell me why you think that. And chances are pretty good that I will do a review or at least give a mention of the watch on our next podcast. And so until then, I'm going to thank you for tuning in. And I'm going to leave you here with a commercial from one of our sponsors. So be sure to use that email address on the bottom of the screen. Talk to me about how you too can become a subscriber right here on the Poor Boys Horology Podcast, how you can be an advertiser on this great show. And right now we've got a great special, just $10. And, these podcasts are going to be up here for years and years and years, and more people are going to watch. And, so, for a low amount of money, you'll be able to get a lot out there. And so I want you to email me about that. Email me, tell me what is your favorite military watch and why. And, hey, I know a lot of you are in places around the world. I've got a friend of mine. I just talked to him today. He's still in Italy. He lives here in the United States, but he took a vacation to Italy, and he got there just a few days before everything started to go crazy in the world. And he's been stuck in Italy for 2 months now. He said that he's had 3 flights to come back to the States, and all 3 of them end up getting canceled at the last minute. He said he just booked a flight. Today's May 20th, and he said he has one booked now for May 31st, and he's hoping and praying that he can finally come home. He's been living in this little town in Italy. He's not even stuck in Rome or Pisa or Venice or somewhere. He's stuck in some little itty-bitty place, and he says his 2 highlights of the week are on Tuesday when he walks the trash outside, and then there's a little pizza place that's open 1 day a week for just a few hours that allows people to come and pick up pizza at the window. And he said those are the only 2 times he's really even allowed out of his little villa. And, those are the highlights of his life right now. And so I know if you're here in the United States, as most of you probably are, maybe the beaches are starting to open. California, talk about the stupidest thing. You can walk on the wet sand, but not the dry sand. How the hell you tell the difference? I don't know. You say, well, that should be pretty easy. But, you would think all the sand at the beach would be wet. Again, I don't know. But anyways, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to encourage you to go out there and, the sun is shining and the weather's warming up. Go out there, play you some golf, play you some tennis, go swimming, take a jog, take your kids out in the woods and to have a nature day. And if that's an act of civil disobedience where you live, then, maybe you need to be civilly disobedient. God knows I've been. But, this is America. It's supposed to be the land of the free and the home of the brave. So, we damn well need to be acting like it. But anyways, I look forward to being with you again in next month's podcast. So let me know what your favorite watches are. And we'll be looking at them here in the next one.
Breaker one might be crazy, but I ain't dumb. Crazy Cooter coming at you. Hey, y'all, got your ears on? Well, I got some news for you. We're here at our brand new Cooters in the Country store in Sperryville, Virginia. Good old Sperryville, where Cooters started many years ago. Folks are coming from all over Hazard County, and we're going to have a grand old time with good music, good food, and best of all, good friends. Hope y'all can be there. Up, here come Enos. Huck got Cletus with her. I'm down and I'm gone.